Brianna, welcome back to the Smart Nutrition Made Simple show. How are you doing?
I'm so excited to be here. We've rescheduled this a few
A
times, so I'm
few.
excited. You're one of my favorite people on Instagram and in real time, so I'm honored and grateful and excited to be here.
Yeah, same with me. I woke up this morning and I was just super excited. Normally I'm like pretty nervous going, even after all these years, I'm still find myself pretty nervous going into these interviews, but I really acknowledge it's like, wow, I'm really excited to have the opportunity to speak. So thanks for coming back on. We last spoke in episode 73. I think we're now going to be on like episode 140 something. So 70 some,
Ooh.
60 some episodes ago. You have been busy. What the heck have you been up to?
I try. Yeah, I think since last we spoke, I actually might have been living in California when we spoke last.
I think you had just moved back to Jersey.
Maybe just
Is
moved
that
back,
it was
got
like
back to my East Coast roots, probably.
okay,
So yeah, I'm back in Jersey, which I'm so happy, not only for family and friends, but the pizza game is a lot better out here and the
fair
bagels,
enough.
you get it.
Sure.
But I launched my own podcast, the Brianna Approved Podcast, and the listeners may not know, Ben and I are actually doing a podcast swap today. So he's going to be on my podcast as well. I'm
Yes.
excited.
Psyched.
And I recently finished my PhD. So I am a doctor of integrative medicine. I joke if a plane goes down, I can't really help you, but we could talk about how you feel about that
Yeah.
experience and maybe throw in some, nervines or essential oils. And it's been a really exciting past few months, years since we've chatted.
You are an animal. You are an absolute animal. What prompted that commitment?
Honestly, it has always been a conversation my dad and I have had. Like, it's been our dream collectively together to get a PhD. And then I think just the nerd in me, I've always just wanted to learn more. I joke, I want to have a room one day full of all of my degrees and all of my
Yeah,
books that will
you're getting
probably one
close.
day, yeah, impale on my body. And that's how I'll be like found dead, Googling, like, how do I spell anthocyanins? And that will be the journey for me. And I'm excited for it.
That's amazing. So what did you study here and what was your PhD on?
So my PhD was in integrative medicine, which was amazing because, for anybody who's followed me for a while, I think I tried to promote this idea of like, listen, we can all play together nicely. I think in the functional wellness world, people have been fighting so long to be heard where it's like, it can only be white willow bark. And if you ever take Tylenol, you're a terrible person. And I'm like, that's not how it always has to be. And then you have the
Mhm.
quote Western world where it's like, this is your problem, so take this drug and that's it. And it's like life is never that black and white or that simple. And there's always a time and a place for any and all healing modalities. And so that's what integrative medicine really is. It's about integrating Western philosophy, Eastern philosophy, Chinese medicine, and finding what works for you and also evolving that as you evolve your relationship with yourself and your understanding of health and wellness and all of that. And so, I'm a really big proponent, first and foremost, of like, we can all play together nicely. There's going to always be a time and a place for that. And so, that's what my actual official, title is in Doctor of Integrative Medicine. But I did my dissertation on anxiety because I think that is actually an emotion that is, really misunderstood, number one. And also, that's kind of been my tagline for quite some time. I joke and I call myself a recovering super spaz because Sunday night Brianna is something that my family has dealt with my whole life, where I would cause myself anxiety about all the things I had to do coming up for the week. And, again, and anxiety, I think, has gotten a bad rap. And like any emotion, it serves a purpose. It's just a little bit misunderstood. So I really wanted to dig deeper into that and see what the integrative approaches were for dealing and mitigating anxiety.
Maybe you could help us quantify or qualify exactly what anxiety is, and then we can talk both about the conventional approach and then the more integrative medicine approach.
Absolutely. Yeah. And what I actually also really focused on in my dissertation, I think what a lot of people don't realize is that depending on what kind of anxiety you have, there are actually very different protocols depending
Mm,
on what neural pathway is activated. So when you quite literally feel anxious, that is more of your amygdala based anxiety. And so that is when somebody says to you, just calm down. And you're like, well, I can't right now, because that requires the prefrontal cortex, which is our much higher functioning logical brain. And so that's where your traditional cognitive behavioral therapy will work, where you can do
sure.
reframing and brain dumps and all of that. Where the amygdala based anxiety is, again, you physically have that fight, flight, freeze response. The sympathetic nervous system is being activated, so on and so forth. So I like to always kind of just tell people that. And then there's also the role of stress and inflammation in anxiety, and how neither of those are necessarily bad or harmful. And we don't want to eliminate either of them. But it's generally about symptoms of imbalances of both of those that can lead to anxiety as a disorder and a spectrum. So I like to always kind of give the 30,000 foot view of that
Hmm.
first, but then also letting people know you're not alone if you have anxiety. It's very common. 40 million Americans have anxiety. It is something that, again, is a spectrum disorder, meaning that you can have anywhere from acute kind of, I heard a song, or I'm going somewhere and I'm feeling anxious. I have a job interview, or I'm
Sure.
going on a date or whatever, to full on, panic disorders. And there's about 5 to 7 main different kinds of anxiety. There's OCD, there's PTSD, there's social anxiety, which I often joke and call that my excuse to cancel plans last minute.
Totally.
And then there's generalized anxiety, which is actually the most common form of anxiety. Women in general are twice as likely to experience anxiety as men. But what's interesting to note about anxiety is that it's a feeling, right, of worry and nervousness, potentially being uneasy about an imminent event or something that is particularly uncertain. So many times we're uncertain of an outcome.
Hmm.
And we also have physical symptoms of anxiety, right? So we can feel tense, we can feel our blood pressure changing, we can feel our heart rate, kind of changing. And so anxiety disorder truly develops from this kind of complex risk of factors, which can, of course, include your genetics, your brain chemistry, your personality, and then life events. So it's not any one thing. So again, when someone's like, I'm anxious, and they make a joke of it, like, yeah, it's kind of funny and cheeky, but there are a lot of other factors that go on. And it is a disorder, meaning that anxiety is more so an umbrella term than just
Sure.
what's wrong with you.
Sounds like it has a ton to do with your lifestyle, obviously genetics, your environment, I'm assuming your diet, gut health, brain health, so on, in previous history, emotional trauma, so on and so forth, determining kind of what areas of the brain, or depending on what areas of the brain are impacted. You had mentioned anxiety, and one of the things I was thinking about is, just based on the different types of brain chemistries, my wife, and I'm going to throw her under the bus here, Christina, with one of the things she's been experiencing recently is like, and what it sounds like is this amygdala based anxiety around, she like can't drive over overpasses
Mm.
anymore. And all of a sudden, over the past like year or so, this feeling is potentiated where all of a sudden she gets like this massive panic attack, where it's like just going over bigger overpasses on the highway. It's like the most random thing ever. I don't know. Is that something that can be common for people? Is that in fact this sort of amygdala based effect?
Yeah. So what's interesting about the neurochemistry of anxiety is that there, again, are certain pathways that are implicated in depending on what kind of anxiety you have. It can even go into like left hemisphere versus right hemisphere. I mean, there's like a lot to go in, but
Hmm.
there's a part of the brain called the thalamus, which kind of acts as this like control center for when we're, experiencing anxiety, or when we're sensing things, whether we're smelling things, whether we're tasting something, whether we're hearing it, whether it's on our body, which is why things like weighted blankets, right, can actually work.
Mm.
There's benefits to that, tactile, hugging, all this kind of stuff, right? And so what happens particularly with the amygdala based anxiety and anxiety in general is that there is pairings and associations, right? So we do this subconsciously in a lot of areas of our life. When I get into the car, I don't think about having to like put a seatbelt on. It's like, oh, I'm sitting in a car, I think about it, I put this
Hmm.
on, right? So we also have happens a lot with PTSD, where I heard something, a conversation came up, I had a vivid dream, whatever it is, right? That's the association and the pairing that made me have a physiological response, because our body now has that pathway go off and we quite literally feel anxious. And so for your wife, for example, if she, let's say, for some reason, subconsciously, consciously, whatever it is, has created this association and pairing with every time I see a bridge, this has now caused me to have a physiological experience and a physiological benefit. And so this is where, again, saying to somebody, just calm down, that's not going to work. What you have to do is, and you're like, babe, just calm down.
I'm yelling at her in the car, like, seriously?
Yeah. And she's like, I'll kill you right now. She's like, I will throw you over this bridge. So that is where things like, particularly for the amygdala, because this is, again, when we're having things like adrenaline, epinephrine, cortisol, right? People only talk about cortisol, but there's a whole gamut of, neurotransmitters and hormones like that are involved. So sometimes we need to physically do something to put us back into parasympathetic mode. And then sometimes we need to actually recreate new associations and pairing. So there was a quote, I think I saw it on like Instagram, where it said, go laugh in every place that you've ever cried. Because think about it, think about something like a breakup, right? You're like, I can never go to that restaurant again, or I can't listen to this song. And so this happens in anxiety too. So, creating new associations and pairings is one option. Another one is doing something to physically put us back into parasympathetic mode, where we let our body know it's safe. So this is why also your brain sometimes can't really handle two emotions at once, why people will say things like, be grateful. And you're like, I don't feel grateful that I'm feeling anxious right now. But your brain sometimes does have an issue worrying about a potential future problem, right? Because that's what anxiety really is a lot of the times, is this, we don't truly know what's going to happen. And from an evolutionary standpoint, that was meant to biologically prime us to say, oh, well, you might die, so you might want to get out of this situation, or you might need to freeze, right? People forget a lot about that fight, flight, freeze response, where, oh, if there's a bear running at me, maybe I should actually just stand still. So sometimes some people freeze, right? So this is also why things like, breathing into bags, right? It takes your mind kind of off of what's going on. This is where you could do things like vagus nerve stimulation. I didn't study that too much in my dissertation, but there is definitely a lot of great research about even putting something really cold, anywhere kind of on, the vagus nerve, particularly even the back of your neck or your chest. So maybe carrying an ice pack in the car when you're going over the bridge might be an option, or just doing something to, grounding, shaking. This is something that a lot of animals do before they fight, actually, right? Like they kind of get themselves hyped up because you're just trying to divert the energy and also the mental energy elsewhere in the body. So those are, some things to do.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think what probably most of us experience on a daily basis is a much lower level form of anxiety. I think we probably all experience this general anxiety feeling at different times of the day, at different times of the month, like whenever it is around different events and experiences. And I imagine it's, like you said, it's a very normal, very primal type of emotion to experience. What's kind of like the conventional approach? Because I imagine it's not as quantified into so many different levels as you just described so well, versus kind of the integrative medicine approach to dealing with anxiety beyond kind of what you already discussed around changing the brain state based on certain activities.
Absolutely. So I think two of the biggest things that we see in conventional treatment for anxiety is cognitive behavioral therapy, which does work really well. However, that works best, again, for that kind of prefrontal cortex type of anxiety. But patient compliance is not great with it, something you have to really keep up with. And a lot of it, like I guess insurance providers, there's kind of, some issues around that as well. And you have to be honest to be like, yeah, I got to change this and I got to work on it. Right. So there's always that level too of being like, yeah, I'm aware, but like, am I going to actually integrate these changes? Then there is also the kind of taking anxiolytics, right? So benzodiazepines. This also has poor patient compliance, and over time, the threshold isn't great. And what happens is that that can actually work better for something like when you're having an amygdala-based anxiety, let's say, where you're quite literally feeling anxious, you take a Valium, you're going to be okay. But if we don't get to the root cause of why do we always feel anxious, what else is going on, then that might not actually work for that person who is a chronic overthinker, who has generalized anxiety, who is a worrywart, a hypochondria, who is their brain just won't shut off. That actually, that might dull their senses a little bit, but that also is not going to get to the root cause of what's going on. So those are kind of the two main treatments. And then I would say, over the past couple of years, we have seen some, more what I call like, quote, hippy dippy stuff, which is great, like meditation. But again, for some people, like for me, the idea of even thinking about meditation like makes me anxious, because the traditional sense of it, of like sitting there, I don't enjoy it. I don't want to do it. So there's other forms of that. You can do like walking meditation, or, laying on the ground and starfishing, or call it savasana, call it whatever you want. Right. So, there's things like that, meditation, mindfulness, right? Deep breathing, vagus nerve activation. So there's a little bit of that. And then again, now more and more, we are seeing some more, I think, of herbal kind of therapeutics being involved. And there's definitely an herbal nutraceutical component that should be talked about that generally isn't, that plays a role, of course, of what's going on with neurotransmitters, our central nervous system, and how our body is physiologically responding.
So how much of the anxiety that we feel on a daily basis, if we can agree that it's somewhat normal to experience, how much of it do you think is self-induced by virtue of our environment, our nutrition, our lifestyle, our lack of structure and planning? So for example, something I've noticed and observed for myself over the last couple of years is when I really start to experience anxiety, it's usually brought on by the fact that I don't have clarity in what it is that I'm focused on, right? If I'm feeling very anxious around, business as an example, or what my week's going to look like, what I've observed is that I don't have a very clear-cut structure around how I'm tackling my responsibilities for a given day, for the week, and so on and so forth, to the degree that when I do, right, when I do create that structure, and I think the same thing has to do with nutrition to some degree, is I all of a sudden, of course, am relieved to know that, okay, I have that structure in place. So I guess backing out of that is, again, how much of this do you feel is brought on by all of those things?
That's a great question. And I think when we're talking about generalized anxiety, which is one of the more common forms, I would say 90+% of the time. If we're talking about, again, like PTSD, OCD, things that are a bit more complicated, right? Probably a lower percent, right? But for the typical person living in America, particularly the past 2.5 years in this pandemic and whatever else has been going on, very much so self-induced. And even the idea of being stressed about stress, getting anxious that I'm feeling anxious. Like, so a lot of that, I think we've even seen a more rise in that, because there's been light and awareness brought to the topic, which is a good thing, because it destigmatizes things, and it brings, a level of let's talk about it and have an open conversation. But also sometimes I think people use that as I'm off the hook now. I have anxiety, so I don't have to tell you, right? So totally. It's almost like a catch-22. And then I think sometimes a really good starting point for that is, how am I worrying well, right? Like, so that's a good conversation to have with yourself. How much of this worry is, quote, good worry versus futile, bad worry? I don't always, love the black and white approach, but I think sometimes our brains do work like that. And we want to see, like, is this a legitimate fear that I have about something that I can actually control? Like, am I going to be able to put my kids through college, right? And things like that. We have real stressors in life. We have real anxiety. And generally, to your point, it's about feeling out of control somewhere else, or we're unsure of an outcome. Or again, many times it's about something that is potentially going to happen, or maybe already did happen, and when we're worried it's going to happen again. So imagining yourselves into worst case scenarios, right?
Yeah. So basically, we should watch more news.
Yeah. Keep watching all the news you can. Get all the social media micro bites of news, the clickbait stuff, all of that is really good for your anxiety for what you're
Okay,
thinking.
so definitely watch the news, keep scrolling
Yes.
mindlessly, especially in the middle of the night when you're supposed to be sleeping. And let's kind of start to segue into a particular interest for me is gut health and anxiety, because we obviously know the connection between the gut and the brain, and I know you could talk for days about that, but maybe touch on that, and then let's kind of parlay that with food choices and anxiety, especially. And then, when we're talking about, talking about kids as well, I'm sure it's the same with kids and adults, but I think it's pretty prevalent.
Absolutely. I love that you brought that up because I think most people's reaction to that would say, oh, I hope Brianna's going to talk about a probiotic. And that's
Yeah.
absolutely not the route I would go, because that again goes back to the problem of the band-aid approach. And to your point, like a lot of it, when we're talking about gut health, right, and the enteric nervous system, gut brain connection, call it whatever you want. Yeah, we can't probiotic our way out of the basics and out of pro-inflammatory thoughts, pro-inflammatory people, foods as well, alcohol. And then you can kind of, depending on what zealot you're following on the internet, like, sugar and gluten and nightshades and all that kind of stuff. But a lot of the basic boring stuff is what you have to do first before you even think about talking about an individualized probiotic, and then a step further, actually figuring out what strain of probiotic you
Right.
need, not just how many CFUs that you can get down when you go and then after that, like destroy a buffet dinner with your friends,
That's
right?
right.
Like I always joke, one of my best friends, Lisa, like in college, she'd always be like, oh man, I just had this like hot dog and whatever else. She's like, what probiotic can I take? I'm
Right.
like, you can't.
No.
You can't. So I always tell people, like, with the gut, I mean, a lot of it does start with our brain, right? So the body is kind of always secondarily responding to what's happening with the central nervous system. And in regards to anxiety, there's a lot more conversation actually around permeability in the blood-brain barrier, which of course is, there is going to be a connection with the gut and all of that. But we have to think about what we're actually putting into our body. So this goes with our thoughts, right? Psychoneuroimmunology is an area of interest that I think is going to keep growing in that
Mhm.
field. Again, you can't probiotic your way out of that. There's also going to be your diet. Like there's very basic, boring things that are going to just work for the body and not work for the body. But now I'm also seeing it kind of turn into the negative effect of everyone thinks that there has to be a gluten-free, paleo, vegan, keto version of XYZ, and that everything is like going to kill you and is the devil. And that's not always the case either. So sometimes I think us being in our own heads about a lot of this stuff is actually more detrimental than just
Yeah.
having a little bit of the real thing or
Sure.
doing whatever you think you want to do. And then sleeping. I mean, there's sleeping, movement, play, laughter, basic dietary stuff, like what's going on individually with me, quality water, environmental toxins, xenoestrogens, all of those have to be checked and assessed first before you even be like, oh yeah, let's just throw a supplement at it, or let's just take a probiotic or whatever.
Or completely eliminate gluten and dairy, or
Yeah.
all of that kind of stuff. No, I mean, I'm appreciative of that a viewpoint, and obviously I agree with you 100%. But I think it's so important for people to acknowledge that, for parents to acknowledge that, for kids that are old enough to start to learn that it's their responsibility to be empowered to take control of their nutrition, because it does impact their health, their energy, their brain, their cognitive function. And it's far, far greater than, as you said, just taking a digestive enzyme or a probiotic, but really comes down to, okay, what's their lifestyle look like? Are they sleeping enough? What's their levels of physical activity? How are they structuring meals in the house? What responsibility are the parents taking for that? Because I don't know if it's now more than ever, or if it's just because it's the world that I live in now, with preteens and, and parents all around me as our social support system. But now I'm hearing left and right, oh, my kid has anxiety, or they have gut issues. Right. And it begs the question of, like, well, what's happening in your home environment? How are they feeding themselves? How are you feeding them? What example are you setting, right, to ensure that they're not reinforcing these, brain gut issues.
Totally. And it's really sad because, for a lot of kids in America, before schools were shut down for a bit and whatever else, like for some people, maybe they don't have that education at home and that's fine. And the parents are doing the best that they can,
Sure.
juggling all the other knives that they're already juggling. And so for some people, the only meal that they get sometimes is the meal at school. And then they go there and then look at the garbage that they're feeding them there. And then they
Yeah, it's
wonder why
horseshit.
kids, yeah, exactly. And then they'll go and be like, it's ADHD. I'm like, is it ADHD or is it red 40 that's in your food and the sugar and all the other stuff? And then, as a growing kid, you're not sleeping enough. You don't care, and, balance and all of that. So it is a really bigger conversation that, again, I think people don't want to always go down that rabbit hole, but that is important. Parents can only do so much at home. You're going to go to a part, I'm not a parent yet, but I would imagine I would be a healthy parent to be like, hey guys, these are like the fun gluten-free cupcakes and like the soccer mom at the game giving out pineapple, but also they're going to go to a birthday party and want to eat real cake, right? So there has to be balance at some point. And it's like, yeah, how much of that conversation can I have? And to your point, setting a good example is important of being like, this is what we eat. This is how we shop. I have clients all the time. If they're local, like we go grocery shopping together and the kids come and it's fun. And we learn how to read a label and we learn what's a
Right.
better option. You like these chips? Well, let's look at these and compare them. So it can be fun. It can be a healthy lifestyle. It doesn't have to be, again, so like, if you eat this, then you're a terrible parent. And, like there's enough pressure on everybody these days.
No, 100%. But at the end of the day, here is like, listen, the parents have to accept responsibility for the behaviors of the kid, and acknowledge it's like, listen, there's only so much you're going to be able to control with what the kids are eating at school, assuming they do a school lunch. It's absolute horseshit. Like I said, they're going to be getting snacks from their friends when they get older and they start to go to birthday parties. They're going to be eating the cake and the candy and all that stuff. And that's fine, right? But it's like, listen, you have the ability, and you have the, you have the ability to be able to teach them in the home what's appropriate for them and to give them the tools to understand how they determine, right, what's appropriate for them or not, based on asking the questions around how that makes them feel, right?
Absolutely.
And helping them make those connections. And so I'm pretty stern on parents not absolving that responsibility simply because they're quote unquote busy, or it's just they give up. And yes, it's very, very hard. I understand that. But I'm with you in sort of saying we have to find this balance between all or nothing, because obviously our kids' health depends on it.
Well, I know you have 3 kids. Have you found that certain ages they're more like excited about it, or it's more difficult at a certain age to be like, hey guys, we're going to be healthy? Or like, what has been your experience with even kind of breaching that topic of like, yeah, I'm a parent and this is the life I live and I'm trying to bring this into the house too. Like, how's that been for you?
Yeah, it's been interesting. And I think early on, it was my kind of obsession of trying to be all in and be like, no gluten. And, when Zoe, our oldest, was very young, it was just like super strict household. And it really didn't work out well. It was putting too much stress on my wife. It was completely unnecessary for Zoe. It was putting too much stress on me and our relationship. And it was sort of like, okay, we've got to relinquish control a little bit here. So over the years, it's really just become, all right, like, it's an interesting dichotomy between me and my wife, because if I'm trying to be, if I'm overly stern, right, about nutrition choices, she's the complete opposite. Whereas if she's sort of focused on more health, associated nutrition choices, then I find myself gravitating towards more flexibility and like, okay, it's fine. Let's go have the ice cream and the candy and whatever. So we do have a nice synergy in that helps the kids understand, that it's fine to have that moderation. We make sure we include plenty of good and, of healthy and relatively unhealthy foods in the house, and really just having the conversations around, listen, guys, here's the things that are better for us, and here's why. How do you feel when you eat those?
Yeah.
The decision's up to you, what you want to have, right, to some degree, but there's certain rules in place. It's like, listen, we're going to have a protein at every meal, right? You have choices as to which protein you want to have. we're going to try and include a vegetable, when we can, depending on the meal. We're going to limit the amount of crap that we're including throughout the day, throughout the week, but we're certainly going to make room for plenty of treats. And so it's really just like over the years, it's trying to just be really reasonable, be open and honest with them. And then most importantly, like I said, is let's just lead by example. Say, regardless of what I tell you to do, if you're doing nothing else but just watching me, am I sort of, setting the standards that I want you to uphold?
Yeah, I think that's such actually a great reframe too, because sometimes people think that they have to be like an authority figure in it always. And I'm sure parents, obviously, like that's kind of your job, but giving people the power. And this goes, I think, even to clients, right? Like anytime we feel like, well, these are your only options, then you're like, don't tell me what to do. And so I'm sure as a parent, it's probably low key, like reverse psychology of being like, these are all of your options. At the end of the day, do what you got to do kind of thing. But this is what we're doing and this is how we feel good. And I joke with my mom all the time. I'm always like, I wonder if I want to marry somebody who's like just as much of a spaz as I am, because I feel like that would be really tough. I need to have balance too. Is like, I think that's really important. I think my parents had balance with me. I think it sounds like you and your wife had balance, and that seems to kind of be one of the keys.
I think so. And then what we've observed is really just the kids naturally start to make better choices. I mean, listen, they're kids. And so they all have different personalities. Our oldest, she's perfectly fine eating steak for breakfast. Our middle, she will eat the fucking chocolate chip pancakes with whipped cream all day long.
Me
and
too.
Same with that, right. Yeah. Same with our 6-year-old boy is like, he will crush any sugar that's in his face. But that's how the girls were when they were younger too. So it's like, listen, they're kids and we all have the same brain that lights up with sugar. And so it's very natural for them to want it. It's just about me just trying not to be too restrictive with them and creating any complexes like, perhaps our parents created with us.
Yeah. Well, there's so many cultural ties. I'm Italian. Like, there's so many cultural ties around food. And I feel like America actually does a very poor job of integrating those things sometimes. Like, I lived abroad in Spain. My brother lives, abroad as well. Like, you go to Italy, you go to Spain, you go to these other places. Like, they're not worried about weighing out 4 ounces of XYZ. And they're actually doing a lot of unhealthy things. And they're eating these, quote, bad foods like pizza. I eat pizza every day for like almost, a week and a half and I was in, Italy. But we also were like chilling a lot more. We were walking around, like we were hanging on the farm life. I mean, like, so I think it is important to just in general working on the healthy relationships that we have with food, because it is how we bond with people. It is how we make memories. And from a childhood standpoint too, it's like, you had a really bad day. Your mom makes you homemade, cupcakes or whatever, pancakes, like you're going to feel better. We bring that into adulthood and maybe we see that manifest in a maybe more aggressive way, like with, emotional eating, but that obviously stems back to something too. So I think it's important to even break down that conversation more about being like, there is a really important relationship we all have to develop with food, around food, with ourselves, and even the people in our lives.
Yeah, most definitely. And that's really, it was interesting. We had, I think what this really just relates to this whole anxiety topic anyways, because again, I feel like so much of this is self-induced or really a product of our environment, especially in America, when it's like all you do is when you scroll social media, you feel like you can't stack up to everything that you see. You're not as successful, you're not as pretty, you're not as fit, and and so on and so forth. We had some clients over to our house the other day for dinner. We do a periodic like get together with our local clients, and we just brought on this great guy named Felipe, and he came over and he was like, dude, I was so nervous to come over here because I felt, and he's like in generally good shape, right? Like he's not obese by any stretch of the imagination. He works out consistently, just needs some improvement with his nutrition. But he came over and he's like, dude, I thought I was going to be like the fattest person here. I felt like, I was so nervous to come over. And obviously, like, we're all just normal people, but I think that that's so much. And it's the same idea as like, right, when people find out what we do and then they see us like eating a slice of pizza or God forbid drinking a beer or something, and they're like, wait, you do that? Like, yeah, because I'm a fucking human, and right, I'm not a total freak, and no one does that, right?
People are shocked when they hear
Like,
that. Like, I remember one time very early when I was back when I was a personal trainer, like, I think it was like after Thanksgiving or something. And I was like, yeah, I had 3 pieces of pecan pie. And the girl was like, you eat pie? And I was
right,
like, I eat pie all the time. Like,
like,
I'm a human. I cry, I eat pie. Like, I do it all, you know? Do you ever feel like there's more added pressure though now because of this social media image that we all have to kind of keep up or whatever? Or like, you know,
you
how's your
know,
relationship been with that?
no, that's a good question. I used to, and now I'm actually making it a point to go out of my way to try and establish that all of that is such nonsense,
Same.
right? It's like, listen, and I almost want to start eating like an asshole all of the
Mm,
time in front of everyone, just so we can kind of get rid of that stigma.
yeah.
Yet, of course, I'm not going to do that to myself. But at the same time, is like, it's just it's crazy. So I think
Yes.
it's a great question, and I think it's really necessary for us to make sure we're authentically sharing that aspect of our lives, so people can understand like they're humans too. Again, they struggle with the same stuff. Like we all have our fucking issues. Like we all have our
100.
issues around nutrition and health and fitness and self-image and relationship with food and relationships in general. And it's like, listen, just because we have more education doesn't make us a better person. It doesn't mean we're perfect, right? But we do have the tools to be able to help you if you're in a similar situation.
Yeah.
So with that said, is let's kind of wrap up this topic of anxiety. But what I would love to do is I would love for you to share kind of some of the useful tools that if they find themselves in situations where they're feeling, again, anxious, as broad of a topic as that is, what are some of the things that you feel like are good go-tos that they can take away?
Absolutely. So first things first sounds very simple and very like that should not be like a thing that I even have to think about, but checking in with like how do I quite literally feel when I do XYZ, or what was happening right before I started to feel anxious? Was it a person? Was it a food that I ate? Was it a song? And then also doing a little reflective work, right? Like, did I not sleep last night? Did I not eat breakfast? Right? Because all emotions, I say this to people all the time. All emotions are just a piece of information. It's like the weather, right? Like if I look outside and I see that it's cloudy out, I'm not going to be like, oh man, I'm pissed it's cloudy. Like I'm going to go wear a tank top. You're going to say, oh, well, every time it's been cloudy in the past, it has rained 70% of the time. So maybe I should bring an umbrella just in case. But me being mad that it's cloudy isn't going to
Mhm.
change that, right? So it's just information. So if you can kind of look at it as like, this is just an emotional, it's a little pebble, if you will, that all emotions are just languages of the body, right? We know this is tale as old as time. So, it's being thrown at you for a reason. So are we listening, number one, before this pebble turns into a big boulder that is thrown at our face and then crushes us? So we have to
Mhm.
do a check-in with ourselves first. We have to also admit where we are being assholes to ourselves, right? Like, what am I allowing that's not actually serving me? Pro-inflammatory people, thoughts, food. These are also very important, just as much as cutting out gluten, dairy, sugar, all of that. You have to really assess like the people in your life and the
Mhm.
conversations you're having with yourself. All of that, the daily activities that you're engaging in, that all comes first. So that's the stuff people don't like to hear because that requires taking responsibility, sitting with emotions sometimes, and doing reflective work. If you're like, that's not the journey for me, I want something a bit more direct, maybe you have done some of that work, I would also consider adding in some complementary and alternative medicine. So there's a lot of really great research on things like adding in acupuncture, also doing things like movement and play, right? So this could be something as simple as, dancing or going for nature walks, nature therapy. We know there's so many benefits. Forest bathing is really popular in,
Mhm.
the Japanese culture because of the negative ions, right? Grounding, earthing, get as hippy dippy as you want with it. But those are all free. Those are all things that you can, except for acupuncture, you have to pay for that.
Sure.
So going outside, Going to sleep, very important for amygdala based anxiety, very important for your brain in general. And I understand sometimes people are like, I can't sleep because I'm anxious. I get that, which is when you can then go ahead and take a step further and maybe work on integrating some herbal, support, and then some of our basic nutraceuticals. So herbal support, there's a big class of herbs called nervines, which again, they help to kind of support the nervous system. So when we say things like this person's quite literally getting on my nerves, or I'm going to have a nervous breakdown, right? That's our central nervous system generally being overactive. So depending on what kind of stressor you are, what kind of anxious person you are, you might want to think about things like, skullcap or lobelia, kava root. So these are all things. And if people are actually interested in learning more about this, I am releasing a befriending anxiety course in the spring, which will go into all of that. So if you want to nerd out and learn more about that. And then some of your really basic nutraceutical stuff. So you need your vitamin D, you need your omega fatty acids, you need your B vitamins, and potentially even things like magnesium and CoQ10 are going to all be, really important. So those are some of your kind of multi-tiered approaches, and sometimes just doing less to get more out of your health is probably one of the best ways to start, of saying, I'm juggling 10 knives right now. I need to put one of them down. Which of them can I put down right now?
Well, if I'm being honest, I think that last one's probably the advice that all of us need to hear and are probably the most resistant against. So with that said, is truly, what is the best probiotic that we should be taking? I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
Dr. Ruscio
no.
is the king on probiotics, so just go follow him. And Dr. Ruscio.
Oh, right. That's awesome and so pertinent. And so thank you, Brianna, for your unbelievable amount of expertise and time, and always so fun having a conversation with you. And I love everything that you're up to. And congratulations on the Ph.D. and defending the dissertation. We didn't talk about how did the dissertation defense go?
Oh my God. Talk about anxiety. It was a 3-hour process. First of all, my advisors were like all over the world. My one advisor lives in Thailand. My other advisor lives in California. I think it started at 9:00 my time, which I go to bed at like 7. So literally the worst version of Brianna you can have. It's a really weird experience. I mean, I definitely had PTSD after it. My nervous system was shot. And then I burst out hysterically crying when they congratulated me and called me doctor. So it was a really weird vortex of emotions. It was very cool.
Good for you. I'm super proud of you. And man, what a journey it's been. So you're doing awesome and you're doing such great things in our field. And it's just nice to have people like you spreading great information and helping people in such significant ways. So thank you for everything that you're doing. And I'm glad to know you and glad to share your wisdom with our listeners. So keep up the good work, and we'll definitely connect, hopefully in another 60 some episodes, if not sooner.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Take care. Talk soon.